ويعني حتى ولو مثلا الوجود في الجنب يعني حاولي تحسسيه ان هو كده هو هيبقى فاهم لو جه متاخر يعني بيتراي لا انا
No, I think you guys have one of the best
كويسة عند هو انتخبوه الدكتور سعيد إذا هو بيتكلم منتخب هو سكن بلان في حصيل هو هل ما يتخاب في حصيل ولا ثاني هلا أنا كنت نائب عنه
tried to help encourage the Egyptian community to engage with the world on these issues. We have made it a point that we will be multidisciplinary in our approach and try to bring all the different opinions that exist out there. And we have also tried to emphasize that policymakers can take the right decisions without having the right information and without having the right academic foundation. And frankly, academics need to focus a little bit more on how to use the tremendous amount of good information that they have to influence the generation of good policy. That's really why we are so happy to have the ability to host this particular event, where we bring to you three very prominent individuals in different fields, all of which are covered by the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, be that public administration, foreign policy and the sorts, be that media and journalism. But I also say this from a personal perspective. I am truly delighted to be able to close the series for this seminar at this level. We started off our first lecture series with the Foreign Minister of Turkey, and to be able to end the program this semester with Minister Lakhdar Brahimi, with Ambassador Rouleau, and with Mr. Costa Gavras is for us, frankly, a particular delight. I grew up watching and learning from these people. So for me to be able to sit here, ask them questions, and encourage them to tell their stories is frankly just a personal pleasure for me, and I'm sure you will all enjoy it. With gentlemen like these, it's very difficult to make introductions, because I will tell you things that you all know, but let me, for the sake of being formal, at least at the beginning part, just say a few words about the three, and then I will explain how we will proceed and get the ball rolling. Ambassador Brahimi lived in Egypt right after the Algerian War of Independence, and ultimately became the Algerian ambassador to Egypt for a number of years. He went on to become the ambassador of his country to the United Kingdom, and a diplomatic advisor to the president of Algeria, and then of course foreign minister of Algeria as well. Since leaving the direct service of his government, he has been a civil servant, if I may, of the world at large, taking on numerous posts for the Secretary General of the United Nations, mostly on peacekeeping and peacemaking and peacekeeping. He's represented the UN everywhere from Haiti to Afghanistan, and has been focusing on global governance in many different hats. Just recently I followed his work in Sudan during the elections in Sudan. He's been prolific, writing and publishing in many different fora, but as somebody who was trained at the UN, the Brahimi report is something that we have quoted over and over and over again. And it was a report written by a number of prominent experts at the UN to try to reform and make the peacekeeping operations more efficient as a response, if I'm not mistaken, to the debacles in Rwanda and what happened then. And it's a very interesting report with a number of recommendations in terms of assets, manpower, infrastructure, fast response. In a few minutes I will ask Minister Brahimi to comment on how much has been done with those recommendations. Ambassador Rouleau is unique. Let me start off by saying he was born here. That's not why he's unique, but he was born here, and it's important for you to know that, because you will hear him speaking Arabic occasionally, you will hear him telling Egyptian stories also. But he was Le Monde's correspondent here in Egypt and the Middle East for over 30 years. He became ambassador of France in Tunis and Turkey, besides being ambassador at large for President Mitterrand for years after that. He's authored many, many articles, and let me add, he's had a very special relationship with President Nasser in years past, and it's something which I'm sure will come up. Mr. Gavras is a filmmaker, be that in terms of directing films or writing scripts for films. His films are particularly relevant to our work here and our discussion here because they tend to be heavy or full of political message in them. In other words, he does films for a political purpose, or at least wants to take advantage of his art to convey a message and convey his opinion. Many of you will remember Zed, others may remember Haneke and others, State of Siege. But they're all statements that our generation can relate to as we grew up. And it's, again, because in society today, advocacy is, frankly, the most important tool and the strongest indication of whether you are a successful policymaker or not. I think using the media, using film, using journalism, and being able to develop and implement policy are all issues which our three panelists will speak to today. Provost Lisa Anderson does us the honor and the pleasure of joining me on the panel. Many of you AUCians know Lisa very well, so she doesn't need introduction to you. Those of you who come from the community and haven't yet met her, you will meet her because she's all over Cairo. But you will meet her because she is interested in so many things. You're bound to cross paths. I've seen her work as a political scientist before I came to AUC. I saw her get into politics before I got into AUC. And frankly, it's a pleasure to work with Lisa. And I'm actually quite happy that she's agreed to share the podium with me because this is a heavyweight set of panelists and it's important to have some good questions out there. What we will do is, basically, I will just ask a general question and we will give each of the panelists 5 to 6 minutes to respond to it whichever way they want. And then Provost Anderson will set forth 1 or 2 or whatever, 3 questions, whatever she wants. And we'll give the panelists a little bit shorter time, but also a chance to answer that. And then depending on where we are, either I will come back again with another set of questions or we will open it up to the floor. So without further introductions, just 2 things. One, I truly thank the panelists for coming here. You honor AUC, you honor our school, and you honor me personally by being here. I welcome all of you to what I'm sure will be an interesting evening. The title of this event was Global Affairs, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And we put it that way because you have a wealth of experience in global affairs, and I can spend hours asking you questions about specific periods of time when you were at the top of trendsetters in those. But ultimately, solving today's problems, one needs to take lessons from the past, but not be bound by them so that you can't look into the future. And if I could, I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about how you saw global affairs during your careers, what you felt was most prominent, what happened that was right, what happened was wrong, and how you can just sort of start the discussion. That will take you about 5 hours, but we'll stop you after about 6-7 minutes. Minister Brahimi, could you start, and we're happy to take it from the Minister.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Ambassador Nabil. It's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to be in Cairo, to be in this university, and to be with you and with Professor Lisa Anderson. I don't want to embarrass either of you, but if there is anybody who doesn't know, Nabil Fahmy is certainly one of the very, very best ambassadors of his generation, not only in Egypt and in the Arab world, but in the world at large. And I congratulate the university, this university, the American University in Cairo, for having convinced him to come and allow himself to be exploited during, I don't know how long he's going to be here. Lisa Anderson was a great professor in Colombia. It was great seeing her there, and it's even better seeing her here. And this university also is to be congratulated for having brought her here. You know, as you said, if we had 5 hours, maybe we could start to discuss the question you have asked. But I will tell you this. Since we are in Cairo, let me say one more thing, and that is for Costa and myself, that this trip is mainly to celebrate Rouleau, who has, I call him the most Egyptian of Frenchmen, and the most Frenchman of Egyptians. You will hear him speak in English with a slight Arabic accent. He will, I'm sure, use a lot of Arabic words when he is here. He does that all the time. This is just to remind you that he is both an Egyptian and a Frenchman. We love him very much, we respect him very much, and we are proud to be with him in this trip. Now, I arrived in this country in 1956, April 56. That's before the nationalization of the Suez Canal, before the aggression in 1956. And I spent 5 years in Indonesia, came back here in 1963, as you said, as ambassador, stayed here until 1970. I have seen a great deal in this country. A lot of very, very good things, and quite a few things were not so good. To answer your question about the past, the present, and let me just tell you 2 or 3 stories. When I was here in the 60s, a frequent visitor was Jawahir Nehru. And Egypt and India were working together in all sorts of fields. And in most fields, Egypt was ahead of India. India was learning from Egypt, was taking from Egypt more than it was giving. That is the situation in 1960. In 1995, I went to India and met old friends, and they were all grumbling that India had made some progress, but not enough. And in particular, China was moving ahead of them, and they couldn't understand or accept that. In 1995, India was making maybe 4 or 5% growth, and that was not enough. They were telling me, you know, a country the size of India, you need to be at least 7% growth in order to make progress. Well, 15 years later, they are making more than 7%. Why isn't Egypt at the same? I think this question I would like to ask your students, not the old people like myself, because obviously we haven't found the answer to that. Second thing that we have seen in that period, Korea. I met a Korean professor in Cambridge a couple of months ago, and he told me that in the late 60s and early 70s, reports were sent to Washington by CIA and the embassy in Seoul, saying regularly, investing in Korea is throwing good money in a bottomless pit. It's useless. Korea is not going to make it. In those days, the per capita income of the Korean was about the same as the per capita in Egypt. Now I think they are at about $20,000 per capita. Then where are we in Egypt? Where are we in Nigeria? Why are we where we are? Why are they where they are? Fifth three, Singapore. I used to visit Singapore when I was in Asia as a representative of our liberation movement. It was a sleepy little town. colonial first and then independent under the leadership of a fiery young leftist called Lee Kuan Yew. Look where Singapore is now. It is super developed, not developed. It is super developed. Whereas they don't have even water. They bring their water through pipelines from Indonesian islands close to Singapore. China. I was in China in 1981, 1982. They were just coming out of the Cultural Revolution. They were just starting to speak about it. They were still wearing Mao dresses and the same haircut, men and women, and riding bicycles. A man in a very, very senior party man, Communist Party of China, told me the Cultural Revolution has taken us 20 years backward. How are we going to make up all that time? The next day I saw Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping told me, yes, we've had a very, very difficult time, but I think we know how to get out of this situation. And evidently they have known how. I'm telling you these stories yesterday to tell you that today, in the Arab world in particular, but also in Africa, we have every reason to be dissatisfied with where we are. But there is also every reason to say that what others have done, we can do. What the Indians have done, why can't we do it? What the Koreans have done, why can't we do it? What Singapore, with absolutely no resource whatsoever, has done, why can't we do it? What China has done, why can't we do it? I think we can. So my reading of yesterday, today, we haven't done well in this part of the world. I think we have got to be self-critical, even more self-critical than we are. But at the same time, we shouldn't be destructively self-critical. We should be constructively self-critical. And you know what the Indians were telling me in 1995, why are we here? We can do better than that. I think we should ask ourselves the same questions and give the same answer. We can do much better than we are doing if we, and this is what I'm saying, I'm addressing this to the young. We know what the question is, we don't know what the answer is, so please find it for us.
Thank you very much.
I'm doubly thankful to Ambassador Fahmy. I say doubly because he gave me the honor to invite me here in this university, and I would like you to know that I appreciate it very much, more so that, as you all know now, I've lived in Egypt. I came over the past 60 years dozens of times to this country. I never had an opportunity to go into this sacred place. So now, at last, at my young age, I am here amongst you. I guess I asked him how long can I speak. He said 5 minutes. I said I accept, but in exchange can I speak 1 hour after that? He said no. So don't be surprised if I stop at the middle of a sentence to be on time. As a matter of fact, I decided to speak about your country, Egypt, my country too. I know that you know everything. You are not going to learn anything from me, but I thought I'll give you a perception of somebody who's been living for the past 60 years in Paris and coming to a country which he knew when he was a child, and what kind of perceptions I had. I have I don't know what to say, the privilege of having known 4 Egypt, different Egypts, 4 eras. Under the monarchy, which I lived as a young man, Egypt was Egyptian by name only. There was foreign occupation, British troops were still here, and the economy was largely, not wholly, controlled by foreigners. Egypt at the time was a democracy by name. It had all the appearances of a democracy, but it was not a democracy. It had political parties, many parties. I used to be, as a young journalist in Egypt, I used to cover parliamentary debates. So I could hear all the debates between different political parties, between the Wafd and the other parties. It was a relatively free press. There were elections, most of them rigged. But the thing is that the palace decided what kind of a government Egypt would have. The Wafd could have a majority, he would dissolve parliament, have new elections, and get the minority parties into government. As a matter of fact, the palace was not the only ruler of Egypt, because as you remember all, in 1942, the British addressed an ultimatum to the king that he should bring back the Wafd, which was in favor of the Allied powers, and the king had to give in. So, I mean, as I say, Egypt was not Egyptian, and it was not democratic. I lived through a surge, an upsurge of Egyptian nationalism. I was here in 1945-46. As a young man, I was studying at the Faculty of Law in Cairo, and I took part in demonstrations against the British occupation. And I remember one demonstration in walking from the university until what you call today Tahrir. At the time, I think it was Ismailia, right?
Right.
And I marched with the students up to Ismailia, and there were the British barracks. They don't exist anymore. Most of you haven't seen them, but it was a terrible sight for all of us. And the slogans were anti-British mostly, against Sidki Pasha also, who was, we considered him as a tool of the British. And the Egyptian police started shooting, and one of my colleagues, an Egyptian student, fell under bullets just next to me. So I tell you, I really felt it in my flesh. The Egyptian national movement was something very strong. It was not, the political parties were not playing the role. There was, of course, the Wafdist young people, I think it was called the youth at Tarianas. It was the youth movement of the Wafdist party, which was very active at the university, because I used to go to their meetings or that. The communists were quite active, although it was a crime in Egypt at the time to be a communist. Many of them were arrested. So I had really a close look to Egypt, to the monarchy. But as you know, there was widespread corruption. There was this question of armaments which were bought at very low price by speculators. It was corrupt, what do you call it, corrupt armaments? فاسدة. أسلحة فاسدة. And of course, this is at the time, although I didn't know about it, a few Egyptian officers, patriots, were in Palestine, and they decided to overthrow the monarchy. I wasn't here when it was overthrown, I was already in Paris. But when I left for Paris, I knew something was going to happen. The people were fed up with the king, they were fed up with the foreign domination, British occupation, and the king had no solution to this problem. Anyway, the second Egypt I've discovered was, since I came back under Nasser, I think since the second Egypt which I discovered, which is Nasserite Egypt, I came dozens of times in this country as a special correspondent. I was not a correspondent in Cairo. I wasn't living here. I was living in Paris, but I came very often to meet people. I used to, as the ambassador mentioned, I used to meet Gamal Abdel Nasser. We had a very good relationship, but also the other leaders, the Egyptian leaders, the free officers. Since I was speaking Arabic and I was representing the most important newspaper in Europe, I had the privilege to follow politics very closely. Now, what was the second Egypt I discovered? Egypt became Egyptian under Nasser. It became Egyptian. First of all, I can think of one thing. Egypt did not have Egyptian leaders, rulers, for, I don't know, centuries. It was always foreigners, people from Albania, from other places, Turks. It's for the first time Nasser was Egyptian from Egyptian soil, who became the leader with all these officers who were Egyptians. That was a new feature in this country. Nasser, over the years, I'm not going to do something chronology, but I just give you the few points, nationalized most, or practically all the foreign-dominated corporations. After 1956, he nationalized many of these corporations. This is the time when the French, the British, and minorities in this country left in quite big numbers. As you remember, the Suez Canal nationalization, which was at the time, very important thing. Never in the third world a government was able to take over a company which was, we have to use the word, a colonial kind of company. Mossadegh in Iran tried to nationalize oil, but he failed miserably. Nasser was the first one to succeed, and I remember he became the most popular man in the third world in general, because everybody was thinking of occupation or of foreign-dominated companies, colonial situations. He gave an example for that. Well, Egypt had for the first time also a very independent foreign policy, playing the East against the West against the East. Nasser was able to have, largely, not always, a very independent policy. He became the head, which also was a new thing, of a pan-Arab movement, which failed, as you know, especially after the secession of Syria from Egypt. The United Arab Republic sort of woke up. It was the beginning, I think, of the decline of the Nasserite Egypt, the second Egypt I've known. First of all, the secession, the failure of the pan-Arab policy, and especially, of course, the military defeat of '67. And Egypt, I think, did not recover from that. Nasser died, as you know, in 1970. Now, I don't know if I have time. I'll speak very briefly of the third Egypt I've known, which is the Sadat era. I'll just give you headings because I don't think I'll have the time. I remember Sadat. I knew him personally also when he was even chief editor of Al Gumhuriyya in the early 50s, 60s. I've known well Sadat, not as well as Gamal Nasser, but I've known him. I met him a few times, and I saw him when he was not a president. And I was really surprised the way he ruled Egypt, because I didn't expect it. I didn't expect him to be president in the first place. But it happened that he was vice president and he automatically became president. And I was also surprised that a few months later he sort of swept away all the other leaders, put them into prison, and he became the sole leader of Egypt. But the things which really surprised me was the completely new policy. It has little, I mean, in my view, it was a little of Nasser in his policies. First of all, there was the infitah, the liberal economy, which was not Nasser's, as I explained, ideology, and people started to enrich themselves. It was another Egypt which I discovered. Second thing, of course, and I follow this very closely, is this separate peace between Egypt and Israel. By the way, I was in Israel when he came, and I was at the Knesset when his speech with Begin, and I immediately understood that he would fail. Why? He made a wonderful speech. Sadat made a wonderful speech. It was humanistic. It was above all the struggles and the conflicts. It was really a human kind of speech. And I listened to Begin. I don't understand Hebrew, but I had a translator, and I was shocked. Begin started to speak of Zionism, Palestine was Jewish, the Arabs were horrible people, all this in front of the Egyptian president. And I understood that very moment that Sadat would not be able to get what he said he was, a global peace in the Meher area, which would have been a great thing. And the article I wrote that evening, that same evening, and I sent to my newspaper, started by one sentence which shocked, I think, most of my readers, and also shocked our correspondent in Israel, who was an Israeli. He resigned from the newspaper on that day. I started my article with the following sentence: President Sadat has lost his bet. A perdu son pari. I don't know if you well translated. It's a bet. Yeah? And since then, I followed the Camp David talks. I went to the United States and all that. I was also against Camp David. I knew that separate peace, contrary to what most people thought, there was world enthusiasm, including in my country, in France. I thought that this separate peace is going to be a catastrophe because Begin and his successors would have a free hand against the Palestinians, against the Syrians. The strategy of Begin was extremely intelligent, you say? Nabil was extremely intelligent. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you a little story which I've never published. I went to Israel elections, election was in, I think it was 73 or 74, and the chief of the election campaign of Begin, that is the Likud party, at that time was General Ezer Weizmann, whom you know, he became president of Israel. He came to see me at the hotel because I wanted to have an interview too. And he told me, look, Eric, I'm going to give you a big secret. Don't publish it. But I want you to know that Begin has taken the decision to give back the whole of Sinai to Egypt because we want to have peace with Egypt. Of course, I didn't publish it. I respected my word, but I didn't believe him. Because all the statements of Dayan, all this was, they would not give Sinai, all of Sinai. But then I realized it was a very intelligent move because they killed the Arab world. The Arab world could not react anymore to Israel on any issue. Begin made, I think, a major step to free Israel from any Arab pressure. Anyway, so I was saying, in Fatah, peace with Israel, close relationship with the United States, which Nasser did not have. He had also an informal alliance with Muslim brethren. Sadat feared, I think he was wrong, but he feared the Nasserite opposition and the communists. So he became a kind of an ally. He sort of liberated the Muslims, the Islamists, and all that. Unfortunately, he made a mistake there. These people whom he thought were objective allies, they killed him. I think I will stop there, not in the middle of a sentence, but I will not speak to you of the fourth Egypt I've discovered, which is your Egypt today, Hosni Mubarak. I'm sure you can tell me many things which I don't know. Thank you for listening to me.
Mr. Gavras. This is always the difficult moment for a person who makes even to make a speech on a panel. And especially after those two speeches were quite extraordinary. I belong to that generation who went through the second half of the 20th century. And we started that second half, my generation, with big hopes, saying the world will change, and we try, each one of us, to do something to change the world. And it was an extraordinary adventure to live in France. I left Greece when I was 20. It was a very tough period. I went to France and discovered what was democracy in the 50s, early 50s. What was to be free was to have a state who takes care of his children, free education, free libraries, free very cheap restaurants for the students. And I was coming from a country who was exactly the contrary. So the hobby was great. And when I started the studies, literature and then cinema, I said the cinema has to speak about that. And what I tried to do, and I was not the only one, we tried to speak about the society, about the problems, and what was bad and what could be good, and so forth. And went on for years and years, and the things started getting better. The dictatorship here and there fell apart. And freedom came to some countries, like yours, for example. Greece has changed, other countries have changed, the dictatorships in Latin America have changed. And we're hoping we're going better and better. And something happened in a certain moment. And of course, the Soviet Union fell apart, and we say, finally, the world's going to be a kind of paradise, because freedom is everywhere. But what happened? We started having here and there dictatorial democracies, which halfway of democracy. And we start having other problems. And little by little, I believe, we arrived in the world, my feeling, my personal feeling, is we arrived in the world today, we are in a mess, which is a mess everywhere. And the mess we started years ago, it was became much more bigger with Mr. Bush in the United States. And we live today in a world where young people, we used to say the future will be better. Today, what the young people can say? The future, economically, it won't be that good. The environment won't be any good. The freedom here and there belongs to banks, to the big capital, to the Wall Street or to other places. Fortunately, this President of the United States, Obama, tries to do something. We see if he succeeds, it will be a miracle in my feeling. So the world, there was a war here and there with no possibilities to see a solution. So that's my feeling. I won't pursue in that direction. I will better to answer to your questions. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, all three of you. Thank you very much for these introductory remarks. They reflect a tremendous passion on your part in terms of where the world should be and how we need to move forward. Can I invite Phyllis Anderson to open up the debate?
Thank you very much. I want to join in congratulating you, Fahmy, for putting this extraordinary panel together for us. I do think it's a truly unusual opportunity to reflect on the shape of the world that we're living in. And so perhaps let me start the enthusiasm and so forth and so on. If you were 25 today, what would you be doing?
That's the only possibility you have today, and keep fighting.
I'm sorry, I can't be enthusiastic today.
Are you? Exactly. Some people aren't.
No, I'm not enthusiastic. I think the great hopes, I come back to this country. Well, I cover a lot in the Arab world. I could speak about Iraq or Lebanon, Syria. But since we're in Cairo, I can tell you one thing. In Cairo, during the years of Nasser, there were years of hope, of pride. Egyptians found their pride again as being Egyptians. And many thought that this was a golden era which started, and as you know, it failed.
I think I have to be a little bit more voluntarist than that. I think rather than say what I would do if I were 25, if a 25-year-old man or woman asked me that question, what can we do? I would say that You know, the situation is extremely bad. There are very, very serious problems. Globalization has come with certainly pluses, but a lot of minuses, and we perhaps see more of the minuses now than the pluses. But I would tell this young man or woman, when I was your age, the situation was worse than it is today. We were a colony, we had no rights, and we had no means in our hands to change the situation. And yet, we said this is unacceptable. Our parents and grandparents have accepted this situation, we will not accept it. And we will set to change it. And our parents used to tell us, you're crazy, what are you up to? Well, I think probably we're a little bit crazy, but it worked. So now, you who are 25, I think you have got to criticize what we have done for you. The country we have handed over to you, whether it's Egypt or Algeria or any other place, or France for that matter, or Greece. And you do not accept that and say we are going to have a different country. We are going to have a different world. I think Obama has come with a few, slogans that are very appealing. Yes, we can. I think we can everywhere. We can change the world. And I told you, the Americans were writing from Seoul that it is a waste of time. Korea has no future. The Koreans said, no, we have a future, and they have made a future for themselves. The Chinese, I was there in 1981, 82. It was extremely gloomy. I met a Chinese ambassador the other day, former ambassador. He told me I spent 2 years. The idea was that I had to learn from the peasants. Sent from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs into the countryside to learn from the peasants for 2 years. And China has lifted itself up and it's moving places.
It sounds
So
to
we
me
can
like
change the world.
you're advocating a little more craziness in young
Absolutely, yes, yes. I think I'm telling the young people, be optimistic, and when you go to the university, you go to the university to learn and to make money one day, but also to change the world. So go ahead and change the world.
Okay, he's just thrown down the gauntlet to all of you who are 25. I have a different kind of question, actually. One of the things that was quite striking, particularly Ambassador Brahimi and Mr. Rouleau, in your discussion, was the extent to which you talked about people. And when you think about the sort of middle of the 20th century, it really does seem like a time when heroes walked the earth. There were these larger-than-life people. That was Nehru, and it was Nasser, and it was, this huge... There aren't any people like that anymore, I don't think. What happened to them?
The defeat of Nazism and fascism. And I was speaking about the Egyptian national movement, the upsurge. I should have said, but I can say it now. It was a general feature in most third countries. Don't forget that most of these countries which were occupied or under colonial rule were able to liberate themselves in the 60s like Algeria. So when you have such a situation, you have great men who can lead those situations. Today, you don't have great men in England or in France. You don't have a De Gaulle, you don't have a Churchill. He says we don't need them. I don't know. Maybe we should need them, but the situation today is a very difficult situation. I'm talking to all of you because We're in a transition period. If we had reached some point, I think you can have great men who understand the situation, who take over the leadership, and they will do it. But when you are in transition, you know the point where you left. You don't know where you're going to end up. And people today have no ideas. If you have no ideas, you have no leaders. Today, ask a right-wing party in France or a left-wing party in France, unfortunately, they have no product. The leftists don't know what to say, especially after the death of the Soviet Union, how do you say this, the fall of the Soviet Union. The communists, the French Communist Party at the end of the Second World War had something between 25 and 28% of the population. Today they're 2%. The communists are finished. And I'm talking, in Italy they've disappeared totally. The socialist parties, which are not communists, are paying also for the defeat of socialism as such. The right-wing parties have nothing to offer, except they ask us to adapt to the situation, a situation which we cannot adapt. He said something very true. Globalization has many minuses. People are suffering. Today we have a terrible economic crisis in Europe. I don't know if you are aware of it, but Greece is just the upper part of the iceberg. But Spain, Portugal, even France may have very difficult economic situation. But you don't realize how much poverty is growing in the whole of Europe, how much despair there is. The Greeks are despairing. They are trying to make them pay for the mistakes their leaders have made. Their leaders spent too much money. They lent it on credit. They took debts. They have a lot of debts. They borrowed a lot of money, and now who is going to pay for it? The small Greeks. Somebody who is earning 1,000 euros, shall we say $1,000 a month, they're asking him to reduce it to 800. But this very man in Greece who's earning $1,000 is working as a taxi driver to be able to spend for his family. They're going to reduce that also. Instead of taking their pension. In Greece, it's very exceptional, but it goes like that. You had the right to go on pension and have full salary at the age of 57, which is unique in Europe. Now they're asking to have 67, years 67. They have to work 10 more years to get the salary. Why should the Greeks pay the price for the criminal financial activities of their leaders? Now there's nearly a revolt in Greece today. You have heard that 3 people were killed yesterday. Now all this affects us. We are living in France, but it affects us because we are afraid that something of the sort will happen also in our country. So to answer your question very briefly, there are no leaders today, no ideas. We're in a transition. We don't see clearly where we're going. We don't know where we're going to end up. What will capitalism become? Some people say we have to suppress capitalism. It's stupid. You cannot suppress capitalism. Others, people like Obama and other people in Europe, say let us reform capitalism. How do you reform capitalism? When the banks in the world are ruling the country today. Governments are not ruling anymore. We are under the power of banks and financial institutions. This is why
they evoked our imagination. And I just wonder whether there's something about the new media that doesn't have the same quality, doesn't bring out our being able to imagine ourselves active in the same way. And I just wondered whether any of you had thought about we talk about the organizing capacity of Facebook, but it doesn't excite us, it doesn't make us rush out and feel more enthusiastic, greater dignity, things that we care about in the same way, frankly, that watching one of your films would, and reading some of your articles would. So talk to me a little bit about whether you think that the medium itself that you worked in had a link to the way you thought about change and the way you encouraged other people to think about change.
Yeah, yes, the cinema has changed drastically everywhere. First, I would like to say that the cinema cannot exist with the help of the state. The only cinema in the United States which exists without, let's say, without the help of the state, the United States, but the United States helped very much cinema. A national cinema is absolutely necessary, in my feeling, because it's the mirror for the people to see themselves, and also it's a way to show how the country is outside. France, people in France, governments in France, they all decided that France has to have a cinema, and since now more than 50 years, we're making something like 150 to 200 movies every year, all kind of movies. There's total freedom. And there is also help of the state for the good stories. But of course the media has changed drastically, and the media, the most important one is the American cinema. And the American cinema, we can see, everyone can see, has changed, because it doesn't belong anymore to the big producers, of the let's say the silent period, and then the 30s, the 50s, the 60s, 70s. The cinema today, it belongs to the big banks, to the big companies, and they're cloning the movies, if I can say. They're doing the same movie again and again. When they have a big success, and they try to do other successes. And of course, they introduce the action. We have only movies with only action, no stories. We have special effect movies, and the stories thing like this. The characters, the psychology of the characters, thing like this. So, and they have created heroes. Schwarzenegger was so big hero, he became governor of cinema. So you can see how the leaders sometimes are created. So the cinema, unfortunately, has changed. The only way to have a cinema with reach, with differences, is to have a good help of the state, and to give freedom to the cineasts, and to create a way of learning cinema and having good stories, and create other kind of heroes, like the heroes I just said.
I will talk about the media, if you allow me. Again, I must say my disappointment. I mean, I can't see another word. Differences of opinion. We have no censorship in France. It's a totally free country. We have no censorship. We have a lot of freedoms. Newspapers spend their time criticizing the chief of state. Sometimes they're very close of insulting him. He doesn't move an eyelid. He accepts everything. So, I mean, there's no reason why there's so much little difference now between one paper and another. Many years ago, several years ago, you could distinguish a right-wing paper from a left-wing paper. Today, more or less, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate, it's what we call in France la pensée unique. You know what la pensée unique is? How would you translate it? The unique thought, the one voice. It's one voice with different tonalities. We don't have much debate on essential questions. Not much, we have some. But it's superficial. It's very disappointing because there we have a free country and you don't have, in my view, we don't have a free press in that sense. A free press should have had a lot of differences, right, left, center. We don't have that. We lost it. So I personally, I go to the internet. I'm sure many of the young people in France do the same thing. And I try to look from, we have now newspapers, the internet in French, which are very different from the papers in the published paper, I mean those who are published, or the media, the television. They're very different. But again, let me attract your attention. There's criticism, a lot of criticism, but there's no constructive suggestions. For the reason I told you a few moments ago, nobody is able to say, let's do this really, that will take us out of this crisis. Nobody knows the answer, but at least you have criticism of the system, the capitalist system, of the government. So I go to it. And for the American media, allow me to tell you that I read several internet publications in America which are excellent. They're excellent, feature articles, everything. But yet they don't give me the answers to the questions, and your question and answers are a question that most people are asking themselves. So it's not a very bright period for the media in France, I think in the United States, but here we have an American journalist, Scott McCloud, he can tell us better than I do. I don't think the American media has also a very wide range of opinions. I think more or less the American press is saying the same thing in different ways, but we don't have really a real confrontation of ideas.
Now, I've been thinking about the first question, what the heroes are from. I wonder whether we need heroes. You know, take the countries I have spoken about. There's no Nehru, no Indira, no, not even Rajiv in India. Mohan Singh, totally different.
Not that charismatic.
Yeah, not at all, no. But it works. The system works. In China, you don't have Mao Zedong, you don't have Zhou Enlai, you don't have Deng Xiaoping. Again, it's a totally different system. And you have another country which is now not yet at the same level, but seems to be moving in that direction. That's Indonesia. Again, you don't have Sukarno, Suharto, or Hatta, Tahrir. So perhaps you don't need. This is not the era for heroes. This is the era for good managers.
Even in dictatorships?
I beg your pardon?
Even in dictatorships. I mean, we don't need heroes even in dictatorship countries. I mean, who's going to snatch your freedom away? I agree with you, sir, in a democratic emphasis, but in a non-democratic country, I mean, aren't heroes needed? Thanks.
It is not heroes that create situations. It is situations that create heroes. And I think our situation now, certainly in the Arab world, is ready. We cannot stay as that. We cannot continue to slide backward while everybody else is going forward. And we are not going to wait for the man of destiny to show up from somewhere. I think we've got to create that situation that may or may not produce a hero, but will bring the change that we need.
That intervention suggests we should begin to go to there.
Before you take questions from the floor, the microphone's there, so Ms. Matt of your audience. Just,
My name is Julie.
please stand up so we can see you.
My name is Injilay. I'm a journalist from Macedonia Magazine, a run newspaper. First of all, I think we would like to define the concept of a hero. A hero is somebody. Is he the one who gets people together? Is he the one who has a political agenda? Is he the one who can challenge the agendas here and put humanity up front? What is a hero? What's the hero that we need now? Is it different from the one that we used to need 2 or 3 decades ago?
Why don't we take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then we'll ask the panelists to address whatever they want.
I have 2 questions. The first one is for Ambassador Brahimi. You talked a lot about change and that we are facing a lot of problems here in Egypt, in the Middle East, and all over the world. So I would like to ask you, what do you suggest the starting point? Where do we start? As young Egyptians or as young Arabs, where should we start? This is my first question. My second one is for Ambassador Rouleau. Yes, thank you. I would like to ask you, what do you think, since you were here in Egypt, what do you think is the primary social factor that changed throughout your stay or throughout your present time in Egypt? The primary social factor that changed throughout the 4 years that you watched Egypt? Thank you.
One more.
You said that we have every reason to believe that we are capable of growth, but we are not like other countries. So is this because of our political system or economic capabilities?
We are what?
We are capable of growth, but we are not having the growth that we should be having. Is this because of our political system or economic capabilities? Thank you.
I really believe that the young have got to be challenging the common wisdom that exists at any time and in any country. And in our countries, I think it is more necessary than elsewhere. Whether it is our political system, economic system, international environment, I think there is a little bit of all that. The international environment is certainly not very propitious for progress. It is really loaded against it is loaded against the poor, it's against those who are backward and so on. The system is certainly loaded. But I think if I go back to these examples I have here, countries that are like ours, I think I have been to India, I'm sure that it has been also there. India is a third world society. In many ways, it's much poorer than the poverty that we have. It's as backward or more backward than we are, and yet they have made this huge jump ahead. So my question is very simple. What the Indians can do, why the hell can't we do it? In Egypt, in Algeria, in Morocco, in Jordan, and everywhere. There's resources. In Algeria, we have 100 times more resources than Korea. 100 times. Prosperous society. Once again, political regimes. I'm talking about countries who have completely different regimes. Singapore is one kind of regime, Korea is another kind of regime, India is a third type of regime, China is a fourth type of regime. So this can be done under different regimes. So I think what I'm saying is that we have got to challenge, or you have got to challenge the system we have, and you have got to refuse the answer that we are giving you to explain why we are lagging behind. You've got to refuse those answers and come up with your own answers.
The two other questions were, what constitutes a hero in today's world? And the other one was, particularly for Ambassador Rouleau, in your visits to Egypt, what have you seen in terms of social change, or have you seen social change over the years when you're coming back? Or frankly, what has changed that you see most?
I'll take the risk of repeating myself a bit. There was a big change within the monarchy and the second Egypt I discovered, which is Nasser. I mean, there's no doubt that social change was very important, as I already pointed out. I mean, a totally different kind of economic system, totally different political system. I think this was the most dramatic change I noticed. The second one, I also said the Sadat regime was something which was not totally, but quite different from the Nasser regime. Then you have, we introduce liberalism, liberal economy, which did not exist in Egypt under Nasser. You have friendship with America, you have peace with Israel. I mean, for me, it was a totally different country. I mean, I left it, of course, because I used to come very often, and I tried to study the changes in society. There's no doubt I did this work, but since you're asking the question, this is my answer. Now, this, Abd Hosni Mubarak, but you will tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's just a continuity, it's more or less a continuity of the Sadat regime. I mean, there's no break either in the economic system or the political system. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I can't see great differences. Of course it's different. I mean, it's a different era, it's a different country. What strikes me today in Egypt is the social polarization. I think it's very obvious that some people are getting very rich and most people are getting very poor, which is something unhealthy in my view, because in France we're having not the same kind of phenomenon, but this kind of exists. It's always very worrying for social peace in the country that you have polarization. Today it seems to me that polarization has reached a peak as far as I know, but I may be wrong. I mean, I haven't been in Egypt for the past, I came here 3-4 years ago, but I went to a symposium and I left for Paris. I stayed there 4 days. But the time which I stayed 2 or 3 weeks and really studied the situation was in '97, so it is 13 years ago. I'm no more a journalist. And what I'm doing now is writing books and that sort of thing. So this is my answer to your question, but I'd like to listen to what people say about the social system in Egypt and the political system.
Speaking about heroes, I am coming from a country where there are a lot of heroes and statues everywhere. I'm doing a job where we created heroes in a certain way. And we know those heroes who young people run after them like crazy. We know it's been done from nothing and there are nothing there. So I don't know what the heroes are. But I know in our lives, I know that the politicians we create sometimes as heroes, they don't respect their promises. They are there for the power. They fight only for their power and also to serve some interests. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems of our societies, unless the society we're living in Europe, and probably yours. And that's, I think, one of the big problems of society. I'll come back to the beginning of the question, how can change the world today? I think we can change the world by much more freedom, by opening the doors to young people who have a different sensibility, who know better than our society what's the future, what's the society, what they need. We are very aged people, and I know by experience we try to strengthen the power, not to leave anything, to get everything we can, which is completely fake and negative for a society. We have experience, we can use our experience to talk about that, what we know, what we don't know, and leave young people, of course intelligent young people, to go to the power. And those can be heroes if they keep their promises and they are in the power to serve the people, not to serve their own ambition and to the interests of some people.
Thank you. A couple of more questions. To say, we'll take 3 questions at a time.
I insist on getting optimistic answers from the 3 of you. And I start by Costa Gavras, and I'll ask you, which is the best movie you've seen over the last few years? And to Eric Rouleau, which newspaper, in your view, is doing well? Not necessarily in France, which newspaper is doing well in France or the United States or the United Kingdom? And Mr. Brahimi, you have been famous for your capacity at conflict resolution. You went to Afghanistan, you went to Iraq, and you just come from Sudan. So, you know very well the Middle East situation. And I don't think these proximity talks, which are going to start between the Israelis and the Palestinians, will go anywhere. So I'll ask you, because you are the magician, how could you imagine a way of resolving the Middle East conflict?
We'll take one question from the right and then one from the left.
Hi, I'm Angie. I'm a that criticizes itself constantly, but we don't move anywhere because we don't know where to move, and we keep looking in the past, and we see nothing except greater things than what we're seeing in the present. And we look to the future, and we see nothing because people are talking at us, and they're not talking to us. I'm not criticizing our government, anyway. I'm just saying that if somebody's constantly talking at me, I'm not going to understand, but if you're at least talking to me and you're showing us a bit of light, then I'll know where to go. But we're a country that is getting darker and darker and darker, and we think we're going to hit rock bottom, but we just keep falling because we don't know where to go. And young people should do everything you're saying. They should be encouraged to vote, to participate politically, but we fear more than we actually hope.
That he was talking about. And now I am I live this earth and I'm living in the fourth. But I see from the comments of everybody in the podium that maybe it goes without saying, I'm coming from a science background. I don't have any political background or anything. Nobody is addressing really that this young generation should really take the issue of the democracy very seriously. And this is the very first step that needs to be taken for a better economy, for a better life, for a better culture, for a better everything. I believe, in my opinion, that one of the biggest chances that was lost in Nasser era is that there were no democracy. If there were, then things would have changed dramatically. The second thing that I think that the younger generation should really look at seriously is that those who are 25 years old now, in 20, 30 years from now, things will be different in terms of climate and climate change and environment. And this is a global problem. The challenges that were 50 years ago right now are changing a little bit and starting to have a global nature rather than a national nature. Thank you.
Like democracy wasn't so much an answer. How would you think the situation, what is the solution if democracy isn't? That's one thing. The other thing is, I was wondering when you were talking in such a positive light about the Nasser idea, that you said Egypt was Egyptian. And I know a lot of voices are decrying the loss of multiculturalism and so on. In France, there are people of many races, there's a lot of cultural richness, but France hasn't lost its Frenchness. The United States is a hodgepodge of pluralism, cultural pluralism, but it hasn't lost it. Is there a way that Egypt can regain its cosmopolitan nature without losing its Egyptian identity? Last but not least, since we have 3 ambassadors on the podium, and Ambassador Fahmy said that Ambassador Brahimi said that Ambassador Fahmy was one of the best of his generation worldwide. What would each of the 3 ambassadors say about what makes for a good ambassador? Thank you.
And therefore, they're reducing their staff. They're not sending people abroad to stay long enough to study what's happening abroad. The niveau, the level of French journalists, in my view at least, is not as good as it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. But this is a problem which is worldwide, because I understand the American media is having a lot of racial differences also. But I can't go into details why and how, but just answering you. There's some good big newspapers, by the way, news and all that. I'm not saying that the papers are bad. I was saying that they haven't much to say which is different from others, which is again one of the features of our period, as I said, because people just don't know. We're in a transition. It's the worst time to have clear ideas. Now about democracy, I agree with the gentleman here. But it's an ideal thing. Democracy is not a miracle. I mean, you don't have a democracy which is perfect. There's no democracy which is perfect. the procès unique is not due to democracy, it's because of the period we are living in, but it is not democracy which is bringing about the unique thinking, as you say. But the more I grow older, the more I believe that the solution is in democracy. Again, I say there are many types of democracies, but I just want to attract your attention to one thing. Democracy is not just elections, even if they're free. It's not just political parties. It's not freedom of speech only. It's part of it. In my view, I think the most important aspect of democracy is what I call, I don't know if it's in English the right wording, the counterpowers. Is that correct? Contre-pouvoir. The contre-pouvoir. Counterpowers. You have the government with a lot of powers. To have a democracy, you have counterpowers. Associations, unions, clubs, people who confront civil society, they confront the government whenever they believe this is wrong. The government must hear it loudly. You are wrong. We don't agree with you. Even if these associations are not correct. I mean, I'm not saying that they're better than the government, but it's this confrontation between power, state power, and the power of civil society in all its forms, whether it's workers' unions, whether it's associations, whether it's clubs. This is, in my view, is the main feature of democracy. The day a country is able to create freely political parties, which are almost counter power, political parties, which can stand up and say to the government, we will not follow. The day the country will have its associations, its clubs, its unions, I think you're on the right way, because you cannot correct wrongdoing by having one voice, which is a government voice, and other little small voices around trying to say that the government is not doing well. It doesn't work like that. A democracy, you have to confront. And out of confrontation, you have dialogue. And out of dialogue, you may, and you may not, of course, reach the right solutions. I think I answered the two questions there. There's no
The best film. Of course, it's my last movie, the best film. not to speak about all the other ones. But let's be serious. I don't like that kind of competition. Which is the best, the most beautiful lady, you know, have that kind of organization to create the Miss France, Miss Egypt, I don't know, have a Miss Egypt, or the best book, or the best, I hate that kind of things. There's a lot of movies, have to see them, there's a lot of beautiful girls, and probably the ones, they are not the ones they are elected, and so with the movies. And it's not the ones who have the Oscar who are the best, believe me. So we cannot on and on. I don't know, there's a lot of movies. I don't know how many movies you can see here. In France, we have the extraordinary capacity to see movies from all over the world. Some Egyptian movies also. Not that many last time. But so we can say there are good movies from, I don't know, Uzbekistan. I saw an extraordinary movie here last year about Uzbekistan, The Code. Beautiful movie. So there are so many. So it's better not to say, to make that kind of competition.
Do you want to talk about resolution or peace process or whatever you want?
You know, when you said something about people talking at you and going into a pit and so on, it reminded me of a story I heard in Sudan 50 years ago. Saying there is an old respected Sudanese who speaks of Sudan as the country of 1 million cubic kilometers. They told him, Yasid Sheikh, when you speak about area, it is 1 million square miles. He said, "أصل السودان دي حفرة." Sudan is a big hole. That's why we speak about it. But I'm very grateful to you for raising the question of the Middle East, because in an evening like this, it's impossible not to speak about Palestine. And let me say there again that we have not done well. Let me say further that I think that we in the Arab world have failed the people of Palestine. And now their leaders are failing them even worse than we have. So the solution, or rather the problem, is not only because these proximity talks are not going to get anywhere. It's much more serious than that. But then, as somebody who has lived with conflicts, all sorts of conflicts, these last few years, I very seriously say, tell young people in the United Nations and elsewhere, there is no problem that is insoluble. All problems are soluble. The problem is whether we are capable of being creative enough and of doing what it takes to find that solution to that problem. And this is true of the Middle East, of the situation in Palestine. It is soluble. It is absolutely soluble, and as a matter of fact, the ingredients of the solution are now mostly known. The thing is, nobody is really working to get that solution. To get to that solution. Nobody is really working on it. The Israelis, I heard, what's his name, Ilan Pappé, last year. He said, I don't know, maybe you know, he said that on the 17th and 18th of July, 1967, the government of Israel had a very, very long debate, 2 days. And you remember the government then was really national unity. Everybody was in that government. He claims, and he says that documents exist, that the conclusion of that debate was that, look, this time we are not going to kick out of the Palestinians the way we did in 1948. We leave them there. We encourage those who want to leave to leave. We will accept to negotiate, but we will not sign anything. This is what they have been doing until now. Of course, Egypt, as Eric said, that was a big surprise. They never dreamed that Egypt would be the first country to make peace. But about Palestine, they have kept to that, to what apparently was that decision in 1967. Negotiate, but don't come. This is what they are doing. Two, you have very, very often situations where the people that are immersed in a problem are not capable of finding a solution themselves. They need help from outside. It's not that they are bad or stupid or incapable. It is just that some problems at some times need a catalyst from outside. And what we are saying, the Palestinians and the Israelis have to negotiate and have come to terms. Whereas we know very well that they are not capable of this. Three, the Americans, until now, as a matter of fact, the Americans are blameless. They don't claim to be independent and neutral. They repeat every day, we are with Israel 100%. And yet we go to them and say, please, can you be the mediator? They say, yes, we will be the mediator. We will be the mediator. The way we are for Israel. So we will mediate on behalf of Israel. And this is what they have been doing. So, There is a solution. That solution is that it needs a little bit more work from our side. It needs a lot more work from the Palestinian side. It's really outrageous the manner that people who call themselves leaders of Palestine today are treating their people. I had a chance to speak to some from both sides. I told them, يعني انتم شايفين انه اللي عملوا الاسرائيليين مش كفايه. You need what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians is not enough. You want to contribute also to help the Israelis in what they are doing. This is what they are doing. And I think we as Arab countries are letting down the people of Palestine. These last years, I think it's really embarrassing. If there is a little bit of change, let's pay tribute where tribute is due. You have in the United States now, for the first time, a president who knows what the problem in Palestine is. You never had that in the last 50 years. Obama knows what the Palestinian issue is. He knows where the wrongs and rights are, and he knows very well. But what can he do? He has a political environment that is 100% for Israel. And we say absolutely nothing. We say absolutely nothing. We are not talking to the Americans, we are not talking to the American people, we are not talking to the American government. So I think يعني التغيير يبدأ عندنا. Change has to start with the Palestinians, with the Arab world, and then the problem in Palestine can be solved.
We'll take exactly 2 more questions, and if there will be questions, not statements, because we need to close. Mohammed, you ask. You need to take the microphone here.
If I could characterize globalization, I would say it's wallets getting closer, minds getting more polarized, and hearts getting farther. We were used to a Brahimi report every 3 to 4 years. So let's say every 5 years. Brahimi 1 2000, and then I was Brahimi the second with the security. If Brahimi was to write a Brahimi 3 report about how the UN can deal with closer wallets, farther hearts, and more polarized minds, and all of them more emptier. So emptier wallets, emptier hearts, and emptier hearts. What would Brahimi write to the UN 10 years after Brahimi won?
One last question, Mike.
How do you see the rise of religious therapy? Is it
The cause of a problem, or is it a problem that is causing it?
The rise of religious
Zealotry in the area. Is that a cause of problems, or is it a result of problems?
That's what it is.
We'll allow any panelists to answer the questions and then these are any question you want.
In fact, I've studied a lot of the Islamic movements. You would be surprised if I told you that as a young man and young journalist in Cairo, I had long interviews with Hassan al-Banna. So I knew about Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know, I stopped counting years. Since then, I've followed it very closely. I think, to answer briefly your question, I think it's the consequence rather than the origin of problems. If you know, of course, that the real Islamic upsurge started after the '67 war. This is where all the nationalist movements and countries failed. There was no more Arab nationalism, there was no more Egyptian nationalism, there was no more socialism, there was no communism. People turned to religion. I remember back in '67, when I used to come here, I heard some Egyptians tell me, you know, Israel won because the Israelis believe in God and in their religion. and the Torah. So why don't we Arabs turn to the Quran so that we can win? People who went to the Islamists because there was nothing else left. The more political parties. Now, I know very well Iran. I've been very often there too. In Iran, all through the years I used to go to Iran, the Shah was very successful in suppressing every single non-religious party. And when there was an upsurge, who was there to take over the leadership? The Ayatollahs. I think many Arab governments are objective allies of the Islamic movements. Those Arab governments who suppress non-religious views, political views, are helping the Islamists, whether they're saying, well, even when they say they're fighting them. You can help the Islamists by suppressing the others. Now, the last thing I want to say about the Islamic movements, like Hamas in Palestine, if you look at what they say, most of what they say are just nationalist slogans, not religious ones. Islam is just like a cover. But what does Hamas say? Hamas say we want to liberate Palestine. What does Hezbollah in Lebanon say? We want to liberate Palestine. I even go as far as speaking of bin Laden, for whom I don't consider him as a political leader. He's just a terrorist. But what does he say? He speaks of liberating Palestine, liberating Saudi Arabia from foreign domination. Any Arab nationalist party would have said exactly the same thing. In fact, they have adopted most of the nationalist slogans, most of the nationalist objectives, and they're saying, Al-Half al-Islam, we will solve it through Islam. But they're saying exactly what the nationalists have been saying for many years. So I don't think, I have never thought that the Islamic movement was even a threat, a permanent threat. I think that if you have freedoms and political parties are able to act freely, and there's a debate with them, because nobody debates with them. They put them in prison. You will discover that they haven't much to say on the economic issues. They're very limited. If you listen to them, they're very limited. But nobody debates with them. Nobody sits facing them in television and saying, tell me, how do you solve this economic problem in our country? Nobody tells them that. They put them in prison. They're helping them because they make of them heroes. I think that I've seen this in several countries. In Turkey, where I was ambassador, they brought in on television, not the Islamics who are in power now, but other Islamics much more radical. The next day, I forget his name now, he was the leader of the Islamic movement in Turkey. He lost 50% of his popularity because he wasn't able to face Turks who were not religious, who were good Turks, good Muslims, but who didn't agree with the Islamic movement. The moment he was very popular in the country, the moment he was brought to television and facing him somebody who disagreed with him, he fell. As a matter of fact, he lost power. He's no more the head of this party, and we have, I think, a very good man. I know quite well Erdogan, who is now Prime Minister. He's a very moderate man, somebody very respectable. But the man before him was an extremist. And he lost because the Turks were intelligent enough to bring him to television to have a debate. So this, I hope, will answer your question about Islamists.
Just add one or two sentences on this. In our movement, in the old days, during the War of Liberation, we had people who say, Islam what happened. They were members of our movement. They were a minority, and I think we didn't pay attention to them. As Eric said, what has happened is that we haven't solved the problem of our people. And we left the seal to the people who say Islam what happened. the scene is empty. You know, socialism has failed, nationalism has failed. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I used to tell my friends in Algeria, look, all we have built mosques, a lot of them, and there's plenty of bars who serve beer, and both are full. Masajid and barat, so now what's happening in Turkey is very, very interesting. You have people who call themselves Islamists who are becoming sophisticated, and this is a very interesting development. If this development happens in our part of the world, I think that would be welcome. The United Nations and, you know, the report we have produced in the year 2000 was mainly about peacekeeping and conflict resolution. The question you ask is much bigger than that. The report that is needed is really the reform with a very, very big R that they are not really talking about. You see, I think as you said a bit earlier, a lot of the problems are becoming global. That we are addressing these global problems with national governments. The idea would be for the United Nations to become the place where those national governments really meet and organize themselves to address these global problems in a global manner. And that is a little bit more than just reforming the Security Council. I think a few people are talking about that you see, that kind of reform is still far away.
May I just add something which I should have said about the Islamic. If you look at every country, you will discover that 95 to 99%, I'm excluding Algeria, most of 95% of Islamic movements have abandoned definitely, totally terrorism. They want to be integrated in the political system. I will give you one example. The Islamic movement in Tunisia, they haven't made one single terrorist act since Ben Ali came to power. I know well the chief of that movement, I saw him in London. He said anybody who even speaks in the party to have a terrorist act, I'll throw him out of the party. Because this is not our aim. We want to be integrated, have the exactly same chances, go to elections. Take any other country, I can mention it. The Islamic movements have abandoned terrorism. Maybe the time has come to integrate them. If they are there, they represent some people. To keep them out is very negative. It's just giving them more legitimacy. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
That we've had with us this evening three of the most influential figures of their generation. In different but in consecutive ways, as journalists, diplomat, artists, as advocates, they have shaped the way many of us understand the world. It is no doubt true that the circumstances are not as auspicious for heroes, perhaps, as they were in the middle of the 20th century, but these individuals, our panelists, illustrate what you can do with imagination, courage, energy, integrity, and a little hope. And I hope for the next generation, those features of their temperaments are valued. Long before we knew what a change agent was, we felt the promise of redemption in the kind of work that they did. It's been an honor and a privilege for all of us to be with them tonight. Thank you.